Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Will America sanction the Israeli army? Apparently they will, in the middle of a war which is making quite a statement and a departure from the past. Netanyahu has issued a strong statement. We'll tell you what this means for him and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and why the US is doing this. Meanwhile, globally, defense spending has shot up. It has touched a record high of $2.4 trillion. What explains this trend? Which countries are topping the list? We'll tell you. What is Iran's president doing in Pakistan months after they carried out airstrikes in each other's territory? Why is Tesla slashing prices of cars after firing thousands of employees? What does Muizzu's win in the Maldivian election mean for his country and ties with India? What is the latest election row in India? Why is the Prime Minister being accused of hate speech? Do spices cause cancer? 2 Indian brands under the scanner in Singapore and Hong Kong. Why is Namibia being called the future of oil? Why are people in Spain's Canary Islands protesting against tourism when their economy depends on it? And do you have the right to sleep, as in a fundamental right, constitutionally guaranteed? We'll tell you the headlines first. Donald Trump's hush money trial begins in New York. It's the first ever criminal trial of a former US president. Prosecutors accused Trump of criminal conspiracy just before he won the 2016 election. Trump allegedly falsified business records to cover up a payment made to an adult film star. Chaos at the Columbia University in New York. Protests continue for the 5th straight day over Gaza. More than 100 students arrested. Protesters demand that the school sever ties with Israel, which is a key US ally. President Biden condemns the rising anti-Semitism on US college campuses. Germany arrests 3 people for allegedly spying for China. The German nationals reportedly supplied information on military technology to a Chinese intelligence agency. The suspects were arrested in Dusseldorf. Last week, Germany arrested 2 nationals for spying for Russia. In India, the ruling BJP scores its first win in the general election. Their candidate from Surat is elected unopposed. The Congress candidate's nomination was rejected, while all the other candidates withdrew from the fray. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Iraq as he looks to reset ties between the 2 countries. This is the first visit by a Turkish leader to Iraq since the year 2011. Water, oil and regional security to dominate the talks. Erdogan was greeted with a 21-gun salute at Baghdad's airport by the Iraqi Prime Minister. An Indian teen chess grandmaster D. Gukesh creates history, becoming the youngest ever winner of the candidates tournament. The 17-year-old is the first Indian to win the tournament after Vishwanathan Anand. With this win, Gukesh becomes the youngest challenger at the World Championship. Here's a question we never thought we would ask. Will the United States sanction Israel's army? According to many reports, yes, they will. US officials are preparing the sanctions. They could be announced within days. And this is very important. Sort of like a turning point in bilateral relations. Israel's army is fighting a war right now. Plus, they've never been sanctioned before by the US. So if announced, this will be unprecedented, which brings us to the details. The sanctions do not target the entire Israeli Defense Force. They only target 1 battalion. It's called Netzah Yehuda. It was set up way back in 1999. The idea was to allow ultra-Orthodox Jews to serve in the army. Now, these people have strict rules. They must study religious books all the time, pray at certain times of the day, and limit interactions with women. So normal army service is not possible for them, which is why a separate battalion was created in 1999. But in 2022, this battalion was accused of human rights violations. A 78-year-old Palestinian died in their custody. There was a lot of outrage and protest over it. And that case has triggered this sanction. Of course, the timing is key. The US could have decided to ignore or delay the action. Instead, they look all set to implement it. This is a clear message to Israel. Do not cross red lines. And how is Benjamin Netanyahu taking it? Not well. He has promised to defend the IDF from sanctions.
I
will fiercely defend the IDF, our army, and our fighters. If anyone thinks they can impose sanctions on a unit of the IDF, I will fight it with all my strength. As our soldiers are united to protect us on the battlefield, we are united to protect them on the political field.
What would these sanctions do? Well, broadly two things: cut off military aid and stop training programs. And will that affect Israel's war in Gaza? Well, not really. This battalion is not deployed in Gaza. It operates mostly in the West Bank. So Israel's war effort will not be hampered. But their West Bank operations could be. Violence has increased in the last few weeks. Israel just carried out a 2-day raid in northern West Bank. Around 14 Palestinians were killed. In fact, since October 7, the situation has been tense. Some 480 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, all by settlers and the army. So the fear is that things could spiral out of control. Let me show you one example. This Palestinian flag was posted in a West Bank field, but an Israeli man decided to remove it. Look at what happened next. So the US is worried about the West Bank, hence the looming sanctions. But also look at the hypocrisy. The same US is one step closer to approving military aid for Israel. Do you know how much? More than $26 billion. It is part of a larger US aid package, $26 billion. Congress had refused to pass it for the last few months, but looks like the standoff with Iran forced their hand. The bill will now head to the US Senate. After that, Joe Biden can sign it into law. But focus on the double standard here. On one hand, the US gives $26 billion to Israel, of which around half is military aid. On the other hand, it sanctions a battalion of the same IDF. Where is the policy consistency? I'm afraid there is none. This looming sanction is about sending a message. Netanyahu ignored Biden on Gaza, he ignored Biden on Iran, so Washington is trying to act tough. But has Netanyahu got that message? Well, not from the looks of it. Israel has carried out a major airstrike on Rafah, a southern border town in Gaza. Reports say 22 Palestinians were killed. Among them were 18 children. And the survivors don't just blame Israel, they also blame the Americans for their support.
If this happened to only one American, the whole world would be turned upside down. But as for us, unfortunately, the Security Council is not helping. There's normalization with Israel, and it's like die, just die. This is the result of the US weapons and the American support in billions. This is the result.
Now, a couple of things to note here. Biden has toughened his position since October 7th. He has criticized Netanyahu publicly. He's even allowed a Security Council resolution against Israel, yet the war has not stopped. So either Biden's criticism is just for show, or Netanyahu doesn't care about it, which makes you wonder, what does Netanyahu care about? Certainly not public opinion. This weekend, we saw more protests against the Prime Minister. Thousands of Israelis marched in major cities. All of them had the same message: Netanyahu must go.
אתם מוזמנים להצטרף אלינו, ומי שזה רחוק לו מוזמן להתיישב מול כל שר או חבר כנסת.
The pressure may not be working on Netanyahu, but it is working elsewhere. The head of Israel's military intelligence has resigned. He has taken responsibility for the failure around October 7th. He's actually the first important head to roll. But Israelis won't be satisfied. Intelligence failure may have led to the Hamas attack, but it's not responsible for the rest. Prime Minister Netanyahu will have to answer for that. So West Asia has narrowly avoided a wider war, but the threat still remains, and it is not limited to this region. Countries around the world are bracing themselves. Military budgets around the world are breaking records. Last year, global defense spending crossed a record $2.4 trillion. This is the biggest increase in defense budgets in 14 years, and this has happened across the board. Defense spending has gone up in Africa, Europe, West Asia, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. They're all spending big on their militaries. But two countries are driving this surge, the United States and China. Their combined defense budget accounts for 50% of the world's defense spending. Two countries, 50%. Look at the numbers. Last year, the United States spent $916 billion on defense. China allocated $296 billion for their army. So put together, that's more than $1.2 trillion, which should not be surprising because the US and China are the world's biggest economies. They are also geopolitical rivals. So their military budgets are proportional to the size of their economies. They're also a reflection of escalating tensions between the two in conflict zones and territorial disputes in the Indo-Pacific, like in the South China Sea, where China is asserting itself and threatening to take Taiwan by force, also intimidating neighbors like the Philippines, or in the East, where Japan is feeling the heat. The Chinese military has been aggressive. These conflicts drive militarization. China is trying to match America's military might, and this is causing a ripple effect throughout the region. In 2023, Taiwan boosted its military budget by 11%. Last year, they spent close to $17 billion on defense. Same with Japan. Their budget shot up by 11%. Japan spent over $50 billion on defense in 2023. So the global trend is clear. Conflicts are on the rise, and it's pushing up military spending. Since 2010, violent conflicts have tripled. In 2022, 2 billion people were living in conflict-hit areas. So people around the world are feeling more unsafe and insecure, and wars are nowhere close to ending. Take the case of Russia. It wants to continue fighting in Ukraine. In 2023, Moscow increased military spending by 24%. They spent over $109 billion on defense. This year, President Putin has approved a hike, a 30% increase in the military budget. So Moscow is expected to spend around $140 billion on defense this year. West Asia may have avoided a wider war, but the region still remains on high alert. Last year, countries here spent around $200 billion on defense. In West Asia, $200 billion. And here's an interesting point to note. If you look at military spending in proportion to GDP, West Asia spends the most, meaning they lead the world in military spending on a GDP basis. Saudi Arabia is the largest defense spender here with a budget of around $75 billion. And then we come to India. It has a challenging neighborhood. On one side, we have Pakistan, the top exporter of terrorism and a country that we fought wars with. On the other side is China, unrelenting in its expansionism and provoking India both on the Himalayan border and in the high seas. So India too is spending more on defense. Last year, it was the fourth largest spender with a budget of around $83 billion. And so far, we've covered only traditional conflicts, the battles for territory, but our world today has many other forms of conflict. In Central America and the Caribbean, for example, they need bigger defense budgets to fight organized crime. In Africa, conflict against rebel groups in Congo fueled the biggest rise in defense spending. Congo's budget surged by more than 100%. That's the largest in terms of percentage. And this is indicative of the overall trend, a growing appetite for conflict and countries splurging on weapons. Needless to say, this makes our world a more dangerous place. So military spending is at a record. But what about good old diplomacy? Well, that's happening too. Pakistan is hosting Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. He arrived in Islamabad today. Raisi is the first head of state to visit Pakistan after the elections in Pakistan. So it's quite a symbolic trip and a long one too. Raisi will stay in Pakistan for 3 days. He will visit Karachi, Lahore and Islamabad. And Pakistan is very keen on impressing him. Raisi first headed to the Prime Minister's house in Islamabad. He inspected a guard of honor. He also planted a tree to mark International Earth Day. Take a look. A lot of pageantry there. But now we come to the substance. Raisi has already held talks with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. He will also meet the army chief and the president. So what are Pakistan and Iran hoping to achieve here? Well, two things broadly. First is to reset bilateral relations. Things got a bit heated in January this year. Iran carried out an airstrike on Pakistan's border town and Pakistan responded with a strike of its own. So tensions were running high. Raisi will be hoping to cool things down during this visit. And secondly, an economic partnership. Iran and Pakistan share a long border, around 900 kilometers long. Together, they have around 330 million people, so the economic potential is massive, but it remains untapped. Just look at bilateral trade, for example. It's only $2 billion. Iran-Pakistan bilateral trade, $2 billion. Raisi says that is completely unacceptable, and he is targeting $10 billion in bilateral trade.
The economic and trade volume between Iran and Pakistan is not acceptable. We have decided, as a first step, to increase the bilateral trade between our countries to $10 billion.
मैं समझता हूं कि आपकी मुतबरना क़यादत में ईरान ने बहुत तरक्की की है और इंशाअल्लाह आज ये मौका आ गया है कि हम मिलकर पाकिस्तान और ईरान के ताल्लुकात को बहुत मुस्तहकम करें और अपने जो हमारे जो बॉर्डर्स हैं वहां पर तरक्की और खुशहाली के मीनार कायम करें.
2 to 10 is a big jump. Is there a plan to get there? Well, natural gas could be the answer. Iran has the largest gas reserves after Russia. So in 2009, Pakistan and Iran signed a deal. Iran would supply gas to Pakistan for 25 years. Just one problem though. The project is yet to take off. They signed it in 2009. Iran has completed their part of the pipeline, but Pakistan has not built theirs. In 2014, Islamabad had sought an extension of 10 years, which Iran agreed to. But that extension expires this year, 2024. So if Pakistan does not build the pipeline, it must pay a fine. How much? Around $18 billion. So why doesn't Pakistan just build it? Because Iran is sanctioned by the West. The US has asked Pakistan to not build the pipeline. If they do, there could be consequences.
We always advise everyone that doing business with Iran runs the risk of touching upon and coming in contact with our sanctions, and would advise everyone to consider that very carefully. And as the Assistant Secretary made clear last week, we do not support this pipeline going forward.
Pakistan could really use the cheap gas, but the pipeline is a strategic minefield. It's trouble if they build it, it's trouble if they don't. And that sums up this bilateral relationship. On paper, both Iran and Pakistan could use each other's help. Pakistan needs energy and investments. Iran could be the perfect choice. It's a partner of Pakistan's iron brother China. It's also a fellow Muslim neighbor. But geopolitics may not allow it. You see, Pakistan gets a lot of money from Iran's regional rival, that is Saudi Arabia. Plus, the US would never bless this partnership. As for Iran, the need is more political. Recent events have left them isolated in the Muslim world. Just consider last week's airstrikes. The Arab Muslim regimes did not support Iran. One of them, Jordan, shot down Iranian drones. So Tehran needs allies in the Muslim world, and who better than the only Islamic nuclear power? There seems to be political will on either side, but the current geopolitical equations may not allow it, which brings us to India. How should New Delhi see all these developments? Well, Iran is a close partner of India's, but it's not always been a comfortable relationship. In the past, their supreme leader has talked about Kashmir, and Pakistan knows this. Islamabad could use Kashmir to drive a wedge between India and Iran, and we saw evidence of that in Sharif's speech. Listen to this.
गजा में जंग मुकम्मल तौर पर बंद नहीं हो जाती और उनको उनके हकूक नहीं मिलते, इसी तरीके से जनाब सदर कश्मीर की वादी में आज भी उनकी वादी कश्मीरियों के खून से सुर्ख हो चुकी है। मैं आपका और ईरान के अवाम का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं कि आपने हमेशा कश्मीरियों के लिए आवाज उठाई।
Did Raisi also raise Kashmir? Well, no, he did not. And that will make India happy. But this partnership is one to watch out for because it's born out of two dangerous statements: Pakistan's desperation and Iran's isolation. Our next story is about Tesla. Last week, Elon Musk called off his trip to India, citing what he called heavy obligations at Tesla. Reactions and speculation followed. Some critics said that he was just staying back for his pay package, the $56 billion that he wants shareholders to agree to. He's staying back to secure that. But turns out there is more to this decision. Tesla is in trouble, and by extension, so is Elon Musk. The company will release its earnings tomorrow for the first 3 months of 2024, and shareholders are preparing for the worst. Reports say Tesla could show its worst financial performance in 7 years, and the signs are all there. Sales are down, profit margins are declining, and Tesla is struggling to deal with the competition. So we don't really need to wait for tomorrow to understand what is plaguing Tesla. Buyers are not getting their deliveries. The company has pushed back multiple delivery dates. Sales have dropped by almost 10%. In response, Tesla is now selling cars at a discount. Last week, they slashed prices worldwide. In the United States, at least 3 Tesla models saw a price drop. They've also cut down their workforce. Earlier this month, around 14,000 people, 14,000 Tesla employees were asked to go. These are all warning signs that no investor can miss. And 3 of them stand out. Tesla is selling fewer cars, it is failing to meet delivery deadlines, and it is reducing profit margins to push more cars out of showrooms. What does this mean for Tesla? Its fortunes are declining, and this is showing on the stock price as well. In 2024 so far in this year, Tesla's stock price has dropped by a whopping 40%, a 40% drop. In 2021, the company was worth over $1 trillion. Do you know what the value is today? From $1 trillion? Today, it's a little over $450 billion. So in 3 years, Tesla has lost half its value, over $500 billion lost. It has slipped behind Boeing on the S&P 500 index. This is a stock market index. It features America's top 500 companies. And Tesla's losses here are worse than Boeing's. And that's saying something. Boeing has lost the faith of investors, with jets and parts falling from the skies. Tesla apparently is doing even worse. So what is Elon Musk's plan? How will he turn things around? He's switching gears and changing directions, taking even bigger risks. Elon Musk is making another big bet, this time on robo-taxis. It's a new form of self-driving cars, not driven by humans but machines. Musk wants Tesla to make robo-taxis. In fact, he wants to launch one as soon as August this year, which is barely 4 months away. It's a steep deadline, especially when Tesla is falling behind on deliveries. Can it launch a new product category altogether in less than 4 months? More fundamentally, does Tesla even have a prototype? Do they have a working robo-taxi? Do they have a model today? They don't. So far, Tesla has not submitted any designs or working models for a regulatory approval. There are other companies who have tried to bring autonomous vehicles before Tesla, and all of them have failed miserably. In 2018, Uber was testing out its own robo-taxis in Arizona. They had to be banned. Do you know why? Because Uber's self-driving car ended up killing a pedestrian. Just this year, Google's driverless car hit a cyclist. Thankfully, he suffered just minor injuries. Now, these incidents highlight the biggest challenge for autonomous cars. The technology is hard to crack. Can Tesla do what others have failed to? Does Musk have an ace up his sleeve? His investors are skeptical. They wanted Tesla to produce a cheaper car instead, something that the masses can afford. And apparently Musk did try. He ordered his engineers to make a $25,000 Tesla, but reports say the project will now have to take a back seat because Musk is prioritizing the robo-taxi. It's a big gamble. If he succeeds, it will be a revival of Tesla. If he fails, the consequences will be disastrous. Our next story is from the Maldives. General elections were held in the country on Sunday. The people went out to choose their 93 parliamentarians. The results are still coming in, but they show a resounding victory for the president, Mohamed Muizzu. Muizzu's party looks set for a record-breaking victory. They may control a supermajority in parliament, which means President Muizzu will be emboldened. He rose to the presidency with his India Out campaign. He's been promoting anti-India sentiments to polarize voters, and it seems that the Maldivian people have bought his snake oil. But what's done is done. Now we should look to the future. What does this result mean for India, and how should New Delhi prepare itself? Here's our report.
Please elect our candidates for all constituencies in tomorrow's vote. I give full assurances that, hopefully, if our candidates are elected to parliament, that will produce results in everything that the people want.
It seems the people of the Maldives believed Muizzu's assurances. They have given him what he asked for: a thumping victory in Sunday's general election. The final results aren't out yet, but Muizzu's party, the People's National Congress or PNC, has taken a commanding lead. They are on course to win over 70 parliamentary seats out of 93. It gives Muizzu a parliamentary supermajority and makes his grip on power unassailable. A result like this is unheard of in the Maldives, and there may be some underhanded causes for this. Local media reports vote buying and an abuse of state resources to influence the election. Muizzu announced a slew of development projects less than 48 hours before election day. Airports, roads, housing and hospitals. Muizzu announced new projects in all these departments. He also issued a decree on polling day, enlarging the administrative areas of some islands. He did this after voting had begun on Sunday, so the timing is definitely suspect. But it doesn't really matter now. Muizzu has won. He will spend the rest of his tenure championing his policies, his anti-India, pro-China policies. As you can imagine, Beijing is quite pleased with how things turned out.
We congratulate the Maldives on the successful holding of the parliamentary elections and fully respect the choice made by the Maldivian people.
China knows what to expect. Its companies will be awarded lucrative contracts, even companies that most of the world has blacklisted. This was underway even before the election results. China will also get to use the Maldives as a base for its so-called research ships. Again, this was already underway. But what about India? Because, like it or not, Muizzu will be in charge till at least 2028. So what should New Delhi expect? Well, India should be ready for a period of sour relations. This may actually work out in India's favour. The Maldives as a vacation destination is already on the wane. The number of Indians going to the country has declined. It's down by 38% compared to last year. If India can capitalize, then local tourism may benefit. Lakshadweep could profit if India takes advantage of the situation. But this may be the only silver lining. Muizzu's victory paints a bleak picture in other departments. Take the Indian Ocean. It'll now be heavily contested and become another arena for the India-China rivalry. Then there's the game of influence. Any progress on one front, like Bhutan, Nepal or Bangladesh, might be met with a fresh diplomatic setback on the other side of India. And finally, New Delhi should ready a bailout fund. China is known for its debt traps. Sri Lanka collapsed in 2022. India had to bail them out. Nepal is facing mounting debt, thanks to some illogical Chinese projects. The same Chinese companies are now active in the Maldives. So eventually, India may need to help its wayward neighbour. Even if the Maldives has voted against India, New Delhi has always come to help its old friends. If not today, maybe Malé will appreciate this in the years to come.
India's election juggernaut rolls on. The first phase of voting is done. The second phase is slated for April 26th, which is the coming Friday. And all the focus is on a new campaign controversy, this time involving the Prime Minister himself. On Sunday, Prime Minister Modi was campaigning in the state of Rajasthan. He took aim at the Congress party. The Prime Minister said Congress would redistribute wealth to invaders. The opposition says it was a reference to India's Muslims.
उसका मंगलसूत्र वो एक सोने का कीमत का मुद्दा नहीं है, उसके जीवन के सपनों से जुड़ा हुआ है। तुम उसे छीनने की बात कर रहे हो अपने मैनिफेस्टो में। गोल्ड ले लेंगे, सबको वितरित कर देंगे। और पहले जब उनकी सरकार थी उन्होंने कहा था कि देश की संपत्ति पर पहला अधिकार मुसलमानों का है। इसका मतलब ये संपत्ति इकट्ठी करके किसको बांटेंगे? जिनके ज्यादा बच्चे हैं उनको बांटेंगे। घुसपैठियों को बांटेंगे। क्या आपकी मेहनत की कमाई का पैसा घुसपैठियों को दिया जाएगा?
Some background now. Has the Congress party talked about redistributing wealth? Well, not directly. Party leader Rahul Gandhi spoke about financial surveys, studies that could map wealth inequalities. He also promised that Congress would address these inequalities. How? By tweaking quotas and welfare schemes. His slogan was, Jitni Abadi Utna Hak, meaning your rights will depend on your population size. But wealth redistribution is complicated. It doesn't mean snatching wealth from people who have it. It also doesn't mean taking away gold and land. That's an extreme interpretation. Now we come to the next question. Did the Congress party say that Muslims have the first claim over India's resources? Where did this remark come from? Some media reports did mention this in the year 2006. Dr. Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister then, and his government rebutted it in 2006. They called it a deliberate and mischievous misinterpretation. So what did Dr. Manmohan Singh actually say? Let me quote. The component plans for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes will need to be revitalized. We will have to devise innovative plans to ensure that minorities, particularly the Muslim minority, are empowered to share equitably in the fruits of development. They must have the first claim on resources. So the statement was not only for Muslims, it was for all minorities, and the Congress has jumped on this. They're accusing Prime Minister Modi of hate speech. They say he's calling Indian Muslims invaders.
I'm sorry, this is a very disgraceful speech made by the Prime Minister. But you know, the fact is that people realize that when he says the Congress party is going to take all your wealth and give it to the Muslims, that this is just a nakedly communal appeal which normally any civilized election commission would disallow and warn the candidate for speaking like this.
What else is the Congress doing? They filed a complaint with the Election Commission. It says Prime Minister Modi is using religion to seek votes. And what is the poll body saying? They have declined to offer any comment. The Congress president has also sought an appointment with Prime Minister Modi. Apparently, he wants to discuss his party manifesto, iron out any confusions. The question is, what happens next? Well, communication is key. The Congress may not have promised a redistribution of wealth, but there is a bit of confusion around it. What does a financial survey mean? How will it be carried out? And how will inequality be addressed? If the Congress clarifies this, it could settle the debate. Same for the other side. The invader comment has worried some people. And looks like the Prime Minister realizes this, because today he addressed a rally in Uttar Pradesh, and this time he called Muslims brothers and sisters. Listen to this.
मैंने सऊदी अरब के क्राउन प्रिंस से आग्रह किया था कि हमारे भारत के मुसलमान भाई बहनों के लिए हज का कोटा बढ़ाएं। आज न सिर्फ भारत का हज का कोटा बढ़ा है, बल्कि वीजा नियमों को भी आसान बनाया गया है।
The final bit of communication must come from the umpire. I'm talking about the Election Commission of India. The fielding team has appealed for a wicket, so the umpire has to give a decision. He cannot say no comment. And it's important to get this done quickly because the world is watching. Some foreign media agencies have already picked up the story. The New York Times says Modi calls Muslims infiltrators. Al Jazeera says the Indian Prime Minister has returned to old anti-Muslim tropes. CNN says the remarks have deepened India's divide, and when these agencies carry a story, the next stage is obvious, a reaction from Western governments, one of their typical moral lectures. So the onus is on Indian politicians and the Election Commission. They must ensure the election is flawless because there is a lot at stake here for India, for the global south, and for democracy. Let's hope the focus does not shift from that. Our next story is also about India. Indian spices are in a hot soup, pardon the pun. But two Indian spice brands are under the scanner in Hong Kong and Singapore. That's MDH and Everest, both quite popular brands in India. Apparently, their spices contain ethylene oxide. And what is that? It's a carcinogen, a cancer-causing substance often used in pesticides. India has banned its use in food items. So what is it doing in these spices? Are they harmful for your health? And what is India's food safety body doing about it? Our next report tells you.
Spices, they are the heart and soul of Indian cooking. A staple of every Indian household. Crucial to the country's culinary identity. No Indian dish is complete without spices. But are the spices you buy up to the mark? Can they cause cancer? Two Indian spice brands are under the scanner, MDH and Everest Masala. They're quite popular in the country. Their spices were recalled in Hong Kong and Singapore. This was after their food safety bodies flagged them. They say it contains ethylene oxide, a pesticide that's unsuitable for human consumption. So which spices have been flagged? There's MDH's Madras curry powder, MDH Sambar Masala, MDH curry powder and Everest fish curry masala. All four of them have been banned. It started with Hong Kong's CSF, or the Centre for Food Safety. The body collected samples from 3 stores. This was for regular testing. Ethylene oxide was found in the samples. The stores were asked to stop selling the products. Distributors and importers started recalling them. After Hong Kong, Singapore too followed suit. It directed a recall of Everest fish masala. So what exactly is ethylene oxide? It's a colorless and flammable gas. It is used for a lot of things, like cleaning medical equipment, making antifreeze, and even pesticides. So how did it end up in spices? It's used to prevent fungal and bacterial attack, especially during transport and storage. But that doesn't make it a good addition. Ethylene oxide is a Group 1 carcinogen. That means it can cause cancer. In 2011, the European Union banned the use of ethylene oxide in food products. India too has banned it. Some countries still allow it, but only in limited quantities. You see, eating food with small amounts of ethylene oxide is not harmful immediately, but long-term exposure can be deadly, which is why Singapore and Hong Kong have now banned these spices. The companies are yet to comment on this, but this isn't the first time Indian spice brands have gotten into trouble. Last year, the US asked Everest to recall a few items. It was after it tested positive for salmonella. That's a bacteria that leads to foodborne illnesses. The recall and ban has now raised questions about India's food safety standards. In India, there's a ban on using ethylene oxide in food items, yet it's still present in spices. Reports suggest the FSSAI has now jumped into action. That's the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. It will conduct a sampling of all spice brands. 4 to 5 products of each brand will be tested. If any brand is found using the chemical, strict action will be taken against them as per FSSAI guidelines. We'll get to know more in the days to come.
Now we turn to Namibia. It's a country in southern Africa, home to about 3 million people and apparently billions of barrels of oil. A new discovery has been made there by the Portuguese energy company Galp Energia. They say they found huge oil deposits off the coast of Namibia. How huge? About 10 billion barrels. This is the latest oil discovery in offshore Namibia this year. A few months ago, another energy giant other energy giants struck oil as well. Britain's Shell and France's Total Energies. Everything put together, Namibia is now estimated to hold at least 21 billion barrels of oil, which might give it the third largest oil reserves in Africa after Libya and Nigeria, and 15th largest in the world. And this may just be the beginning. These latest discoveries have all come from here. The Orange Basin. It's located near Namibia's southern coast, near South Africa. The entire region is being explored by energy giants from around the world. These firms have carved up the area and they are frantically searching for oil. So far, Shell, Total and now Galp have struck oil, but America's Chevron is also in the hunt. So are Australia's Woodside and South Africa's Rhino Resources. So we may keep hearing about new discoveries and Namibia may become the next big thing in oil. Because the Orange Basin is just one area being explored, there are a number of other potential hotspots, both offshore and inland. So in some time, Namibian oil may be fueling all our vehicles. But it will take years for that to happen, probably decades, because what you're seeing right now is the initial phase, the exploration. That's almost the easy part. After that, the oil needs to be drilled, sold and transported. It will take years to set up that infrastructure. The initial batch of Namibian oil won't flow till at least 2029, so at least another 5 years. And that is what analysts are predicting. And even then, it will start off as a trickle. By 2035, it is expected to produce 380,000 barrels a day, 380,000 barrels per day, which doesn't really compare to major oil-producing nations. Look at the numbers from December 2023. The US produced 13.3 million barrels of oil. Russia, 10.1 million. Saudi Arabia, about 9 million. So even if Namibia exceeds all expectations, oil output may just cross 1 million barrels per day initially, which makes it a promising new entrant, but not a major oil exporter. That also means expectations should be tempered. The discoveries in Namibia won't bring down your petrol prices, not for the next few decades at least. And they also won't turn the country rich overnight. It won't suddenly become the next Dubai or Saudi. That takes years of expansion, and Namibia will also have to avoid corruption. The country's oil fields are being explored by foreign companies, Shell, Total, Galp and all the others. Galp controls 80% of the new fields it discovered. Namibia State Oil Company owns 10% and another Namibian company has the remaining 10%, meaning 8 out of every $10 will go to Galp. Namibia's state oil firm has signed similar deals with all the foreign oil companies. So if it is not careful, it may not see the profits from the resources anytime soon. The first cut may go to the West instead, and Namibia could be forced to make do with scraps. But if that is avoided, it's a great opportunity for the nation and for India as well. India is home to the largest oil refinery in the world. African oil from Nigeria and Angola already comes to India for refining. Namibia could become another partner, bringing jobs and development to both nations. But again, this is getting ahead of ourselves. First, let us hope that Namibia truly benefits from its newfound resources. For our next story, let's talk about the Canary Islands, located off the coast of Morocco. These islands are part of Spain and their residents are up in arms. This weekend, 50,000 people protested on the streets. Why? Because they do not want any more tourists. Canary Islands have a population of over 2 million. But last year, 14 million people visited the archipelago. 14 million. Which means there's a scramble for resources, and this is a story that is not unique to this setting. It's the story of most tourist hotspots across the globe. They've had enough. They don't want more people to visit, even if their economies depend on tourism. Our next report tells you why this is happening and how cities can deal with over-tourism.
Golden beaches, hundreds of volcanoes, rich culture and endless adventures. This is the Canary Islands, an archipelago located off the coast of Morocco. The islands are a part of Spain and they're on every tourist's bucket list. But it doesn't seem that tourists are welcome there. This was Tenerife on Saturday. Tens of thousands of people on the streets, slamming the government, raising slogans, all against tourists. These residents believe that the island's tourism model is unsustainable. They say it overwhelms resources and makes life unaffordable and is also not environmentally sustainable.
This isn't a message against the tourists, it's a message against the model of tourism, which does not benefit the land and which we need to change.
This is to defend our land, to end collapse on this island, which is due to too many people. We can't cope with all this. It's too much for a small island. We also fight for decent housing, to not pay excessively high rents, and just to be on our own land.
The protesters have a few demands: limits on tourist numbers, a moratorium on development projects, and a halt on excessive construction. They say that they're not against the tourists, instead, they want it to be more beneficial for residents. But is that really possible? Tourism makes up for 35% of the economy of the Canary Islands. It accounts for 40% of the jobs. The island has a population of 2.2 million. But last year, nearly 14 million tourists visited the archipelago. So that's over 6 times the population. Protesters say this puts a massive strain on limited resources. And Canary Islands isn't the only one complaining. Over-tourism is a complaint across the world. Cities are tired of tourists and they want them to stay away. And they're imposing all sorts of measures. Venice is charging tourists to enter the city. Hawaii is imposing a climate tax on tourists. Bali is introducing a new tourist tax. Amsterdam is banning the construction of new hotels. Italy can fine tourists for lingering too long for selfies. And Kyoto will deny tourists access to private alleys. So clearly, tourist hotspots have had enough. But will these restrictions actually help? Global tourism is at a record high. This year, it's set to reach pre-pandemic levels. Travel will add a record $11 trillion to the global economy in 2024. According to the World Tourism Organization, international tourists will surpass 2 billion by 2030. So tourists aren't going anywhere, yet the places they want to visit remain the same. That puts an immense pressure on resources and on the local residents, which means governments must take some action. Tourism is crucial for the economy, so banning it makes no sense. But they can take steps to make it more sustainable. They can prioritize both economy and the well-being of its citizens. Countries must promote responsible travel. The focus should be on quality experience and not bustling sidewalks full of people shoving each other to get to the next selfie point.
Before we begin our last story tonight, I have a simple question for you. What are some of the basic human rights? Right to life, right to liberty, right to education, and so on. In all likelihood, you know all of this. But did you know that right to sleep is also part of this list? If you don't believe me, hear this out. Last year, a 64-year-old Indian businessman came under scrutiny for an alleged bank fraud case. He was questioned by the Enforcement Directorate, that's a law enforcement agency in India, the ED. Now, the man claims that he was made to wait at the ED office, and his statement was recorded overnight between 10:30 p.m. and 3 a.m. Basically, he was awake for 20 hours, so he filed a petition in the Bombay High Court saying that he was sleep deprived. And guess what? The court agreed. It disapproved of the practice and called it a violation of basic human rights, the right to sleep. And this comes as a wake-up call. It may sound hard to believe, but in India, sleep is a fundamental right. It was deemed so by the Supreme Court about a decade ago. Sleep finds mention in Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which protects the right to life and personal liberty. So every Indian citizen can claim the right to sleep, and it will protect them from arbitrary action, be it from the government or local authorities or even private companies. Basically, if you're an Indian citizen, your shut-eye is legally protected. Sounds dreamy, doesn't it? But this does not mean that you evoke the right to push school timings, just as you wouldn't use the right to liberty to get out of eating green vegetables. Like most fundamental rights, terms and conditions apply. It's about knowing that sleep is a necessity for humans. It's not a luxury. Sleep deprivation impairs physical health and cognitive function. According to studies, there is a direct link between the lack of sleep and poor reasoning abilities. People who spend 24 hours without sleep are almost 5 times more likely to sign a false confession. Which is why sleep deprivation is routinely a key tool in enhanced interrogations. It is used as a mode of torture. It is seen as a cruel tactic, and there is an array of court trials over it globally. So not only in India, but the world over, sleep is protected. It is seen as a basic human right. It is part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. These are all international agreements to protect human rights. Many countries do not list sleep in their constitution, but they have other policies making up for it. For instance, in the year 2001, the European Court of Human Rights had a ruling. It said that all residents have the right to a good night's sleep, following which the Heathrow Airport in the UK limited flights at night, so sleep of nearby Londoners is less disturbed. Meanwhile, many countries have the right to disconnect, where workers can ignore calls and emails from their bosses outside of work hours, especially at night. If employers breach this rule, they have to pay hefty fines. France pioneered the right to disconnect in 2017. Italy, Belgium, Spain, Ireland and Portugal followed suit. Now Australia will join the club this year. After all, 48% of employees reported working past midnight globally. 48%. These laws protect employees after work hours, both in terms of right to privacy and right to sleep. So differences exist, but there is progress. It goes on to show that the world is not really sleeping on the right to sleep. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In China, tens of thousands were evacuated from the country's south amid heavy floods. In Mexico, residents marked Earth Day with an offering to Mother Earth. And Toronto welcomed spring with a burst of cherry blossoms. Finally, we are taking you back in history on this day, 1989. 100,000 students gathered at China's Tiananmen Square protesting against the government. The students demanded to meet Premier Li Peng. The protest continued for weeks before Chinese troops forcibly cleared the Tiananmen Square. Thousands were killed in this crackdown. We are leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Anh có đâu cái gì à? Đấy cần gì à?
Do you know how much 1 GB data costs in India? It's around 13 rupees. Do you know how much it costs in the US? Around $6. So it's clearly a lot more expensive. Mobile data in India is the third cheapest in the world after Israel and Italy. And this cheap data has led to a boom. More and more people in India are coming online from all over the country and all kinds of socio-economic backgrounds. 820 million Indians use the internet. Over half of them come from rural areas. They hold massive power at their fingertips. Political parties want to woo them, and the best way to reach them is through social media. As India votes, the campaigning has shifted from the ground to the digital realm. There are podcasts, reels, YouTube videos, influencer collabs. It's almost like the election is being fought on the internet. So which party is acing this digital game? How are they courting voters? Can social media decide India's elections? I'm Palki Sharma, and this is Between the Lines. The year was 2014. India was gearing up for elections. Narendra Modi was a prime ministerial candidate. He was standing for the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and they had a clear strategy, a social media push to gain votes. There were Facebook interviews, mobile crowdsourcing, hashtag wars on Twitter, campaigns were digital, promotions were digital. It was an aggressive strategy, and it is said to have worked in their favor, even helped seal Modi's victory. 2014 was India's first social media election. 10 years later, the country is back at the ballot box. Nearly 1 billion voters will cast their vote, and social media will play an even bigger role this time. Just look at the numbers. India has 229 million Instagram users, 535 million WhatsApp users, 315 million Facebook users. It is the biggest market for Meta and also for Google. India has 462 million YouTube users. Social media is booming in the country, all thanks to its young demographic. Half of India's population is under the age of 30. Many of them are first-time voters, which means political parties have their task cut out. They must woo the youth. And how are they doing that? By betting big on social media influencers. Which brings us to the question, who exactly is a social media influencer? How do you qualify? You must have a large and engaged social media following, and you should be able to influence their opinion and behavior. India has nearly 4 million influencers. They're divided into multiple categories like elite, mega, macro and micro. And this depends on the number of followers. They make anywhere between 20,000 to 1 lakh rupees for a sponsored post. In some cases, it can go up to 5 lakh rupees. Again, it depends on their social media reach. India's influencer market will be worth $289 million by the end of this year. By 2026, it could be worth $400 million. So the market is growing, and it's growing at a breakneck speed. Political parties want to ride this wave, so their leaders are joining podcasts. There are candid chats and food vlogs. The action is happening online, so much so that 2024 is being called India's YouTube election. And for good reason. First is YouTube's massive presence. With nearly 500 million users, India is the biggest market for YouTube. 4 out of 5 internet users in India are on YouTube. And the second reason is how this platform is consumed, how it is used. Look at this report from 2021. It says 87% of India's online audience relies on YouTube for national news events. So they're watching news on YouTube, which is why political parties are doubling down. $1.2 million. That's how much the BJP spent on YouTube ads, $1.2 million. This is between June 2023 and January this year. Parties are publishing speeches, uploading campaign videos, holding press conferences, all on YouTube. Take the Bharat Jodo Yatra, for example. It was Congress leader Rahul Gandhi's 3,000-kilometer walk across India. Those who could not join it live could catch it on YouTube. That's where Rahul Gandhi engaged with influencers. He did daily vlogs, video blogs, talked to people on the streets. It was all over the party's YouTube channel. So this is very much an election battleground, with all parties trying to ace the digital game. Currently, leading the social media race is the BJP, that's the ruling party. It has over 21 million followers on X, around 7 million followers on Instagram, and over 50 lakh WhatsApp groups. Compare that to other parties. India's main opposition party, the Indian National Congress, they have 10 million followers on X, around 4 million on Instagram. There's also the Aam Aadmi Party, or AAP, 6 million on X, over 1 million on Instagram. So the BJP is ahead, led by the Prime Minister himself. He is the face of the party and the most popular leader on social media. He has nearly 100 million followers on X, 88 million on Instagram and 20 million on YouTube. By some estimates, Prime Minister Modi is the most followed leader in the world online. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi has 25 million followers on X, 6.4 million on Instagram. Aam Aadmi Party leader Arvind Kejriwal has 27 million on X and around 2 million on Instagram. So other party leaders are not even close. That's a big X factor for the ruling BJP, and they're using it to their advantage. So social media is playing a huge role in this election. And this trend is not limited to India. It's evident across the globe. This is the year of mega elections. More than 70 countries are going to polls. That's nearly 45% of the globe, representing 42% of the global GDP. And the internet plays an outsized role here. Indonesia's elections were called the TikTok elections. US President Joe Biden joined TikTok to campaign for polls. In Pakistan, X went down amid claims of vote rigging. Meta has set up teams to counter AI abuse in the European Union elections. So from Facebook to Twitter and Instagram to TikTok, social media has become the primary electoral battleground. It's where narrative wars are fought and users are converted into voters. That puts a lot of power in the hands of social media companies. They can alter a country's political landscape through their algorithms. There are lots of concerns in this regard. There's fake news, rampant misinformation, hate speech, deep fakes. They can color political opinion, and social media platforms have failed to address these challenges. Look at this Microsoft report. It carries a warning about China. It says China plans to use social media to try to influence India's elections. So it's a truly complex terrain. On one side, it has revolutionized the way information spreads. On the other, you don't even know if that information is correct. It's a double-edged sword, which is why voters must be cautious. You'll see a lot of political posts online, videos and sound bites that may or may not be doctored. So take it with a pinch of salt, double-check the information you get, refer to verified sources and think twice before hitting forward. Not everything you see on the internet is real or true. And you must be able to tell the difference. Because the power of democracy should lie with voters, not algorithms.